goal of the report was to gather data and analyze it and then distribute and present it about the state of the biotechnology industry in the 12 new member states and the candidate countries. And this was a 6th framework project funded by the European Commission. And so I will just briefly take you through some of the things that you all have with you in the report, so sort of the overall status of the sector, and then look at some of the countries in a little bit more detail. So also, as you heard this morning from Patrick, one of the main things we established in this report was a development capacity index. And this was a difficult project to sort of try to reduce the rating of each of these countries to a single number so that we could compare them not only with each other but possibly in the future with other countries, and also with historical data over time to see how they develop. And what we found that the region has 260 biotechnology companies. 29 of these we identified as core therapeutic companies. So as you saw in this morning's presentation of our categorization system, this is actually the companies producing therapeutic products for human use from original IP. The vast majority are biotech services companies, and then there's also quite a few companies that we categorize as other, so these are focusing on environmental biotechnology, industrial biotechnology, or maybe veterinary applications. There's over 10,000 people employed in the sector, and almost 20% of them work in research and development. Vast majority of them are small and medium enterprises, and very few publicly owned companies. Most of these are private companies. There are definitely companies existing in the area that have been around since even the 1800s, but the majority of the foundations have definitely been within the past 20 years. And you can see here, a growth in company foundations and then the economic situation declining and foundations declining as well. While the state of the industry in the new member states can definitely be regarded as being not as advanced as in its Western neighbors, and this is of course due to political instability and the difficulties of transitioning to a market economy. Most of the countries have now, or at least their governments have identified biotechnology as an important area of development. And they've put in policies to try to bring it up to standard, and a lot of them have the goal of coming up to EU 27 average as soon as possible. This is obviously because they've been able to see the lucrative opportunities that lie behind developing this sector. 10 of the countries have established biotechnology associations, which we actually viewed as quite important to their development, because this gives their companies sort of a unified voice for lobbying their government, and also helps provides sort of a presentation of these companies both at home and abroad at conferences, so people see what's going on in the area and become interested in these countries where maybe they didn't have thought to look before. Most financial supports in these areas, as I'm sure you've heard from some of the companies, still comes from national and EU sources. There's very little venture capital and business angel investment available. A lot of this is because, this is the case everywhere, but in this area it's quite more exacerbated. Venture capitalists are either unaware of projects in these areas, or they lack experience in this area and are unwilling to sort of take the extra risk it would take to go into an area where they don't have expertise. The problem with the financial fund, the EU sources or the national funds, as you've also heard, is a lot of the time they're difficult to find and difficult to apply for, and it takes a lot of work and it's a heavy administrative burden. The majority of the research in the area is conducted at universities and institutes. There's very little collaboration with industry. Technology parks and business incubators are beginning to emerge, particularly in the top 3 countries, as we saw. But also, as you heard this morning, a lot of the times these premises are either insufficient or expensive. Clusters are emerging, and the bureaucratic burden, although still present, is declining. The area has sort of a historical reputation for a heavy administrative burden. This is changing, and in some countries, such as Slovenia, it's now possible to start a company almost entirely online and within a few hours. But a lot of the time, even the perception of extra bureaucracy can prevent investors from being interested in the area, or for entrepreneurs from starting new companies. One of the great benefits in the area is actually the high level of education and the skilled workforce that is available, and a lot of the times at lower wages than in the West. while this is favorable for companies starting operations, it does have the negative effect of a lot of skilled people actually leaving this area for abroad where they have more lucrative opportunities. So there's been a bit of a brain drain, but some countries are trying to attract these people back and trying to change policies so that to reverse this trend. Also, students are realizing that there aren't maybe as many lucrative opportunities in the sciences anymore, so there's also been a trend of students moving from the sciences to other fields where they feel they can be more successful, like business and economics. And while the quality of the education is high, due to the limited collaboration between the schools and industry, students come out with a very good technical education, but they often lack the experience or the knowledge how that can actually be applied in industry. In terms of intellectual property, actually most countries are either now already in line with EU regulation or coming in line. This has been important, especially for some of the later countries like Turkey, because once you sort of establish a solid reputation for intellectual property and protection, then a lot of the pharmaceutical companies will start to come in and set up subsidiaries or distribution, and this actually brings a lot of know-how and jobs to the area. Amongst individual scientists, awareness of IP is actually quite high, but there's a lacking infrastructure to apply for patents and this intellectual property. They're not really aware of what they do or not necessarily terribly interested, especially since a lot of the time they have to apply for these funds with their own grant money, and obviously they would prefer to spend that on future research. Technology transfer offices are emerging to help with this, however, almost everywhere they're still in very basic and early stages, and there isn't sort of a coordinated plan, or they're not extremely effective. And so this is, again, the development capacity index that we developed. It looked at both the qualitative factor and the quantitative factor. The quantitative factor was, as you heard this morning, an analysis of how many companies are present, how many products are being developed, how many people work in the industry, and it's a little bit more of a snapshot of what the situation is now. While the qualitative factor looked at sort of the quality of the workforce, other sort of more soft factors, technology transfer, government support that sort of lay the groundwork for improvement and for growth in the area. So hence the development capacity index. And then we combine those two, and you can see the ranking of the countries, with Hungary, Poland, and the Czech Republic were in the top 3. What we really found was that, and as you can see in the report, the situation in each of these countries was very different, ranging from different levels of government commitment. Financing is, while generally lower than in the West, also available at different levels. Infrastructure in some places non-existent, in some places better than in some Western countries. Technology transfer and IP knowledge is very good, but it's still in the early stages, and actually different levels of the workforce available, but generally of a high level. And then so this is what we needed to consider when we next formulated the recommendations that we wanted to make to the Commission, and this is something that Camille will tell you about.